Hey there. Welcome back to Emotionally Wealthy. I'm Karen Conlon. In both June and July, instead of recording 4 episodes with guests, I am actually the guest on a couple of episodes that I'm presenting to you. And in this episode, well, this one is really special to me because it aired back in 2024 when I was a guest on the Therapist Burnout Podcast, hosted by Dr. Jen Blanchette, who is a wonderful clinician, coach, and just a really insightful podcast host. I say that it is an especially important episode because during that time, I was in the process of closing my private practice. And Dr. Jen and I discussed some of the things that I went through in my personal journey through closing the private practice and my personal experience with burnout, some of the signs that I missed along the way, and the things that I would now do differently if I were to do it all again. So while this conversation is especially relevant for therapists and people in the helping professions, I do think that even as a client or potential client of therapy, or maybe even if you're just interested in knowing the other side of it and what it's like for therapists sometimes, well, this might be interesting for you to hear a little bit of the struggles that we go through and the things that we can't share with clients. Of course, this is just my personal experience. Not everyone will experience this the same way, but I do think that overall it will appeal to anyone who can relate to years of just pushing through the exhaustion because their identity is so wrapped up in achievement and responsibility. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had with Dr. Jen Blanchette. Continue tuning in. I will have new episodes every week, but I will see you soon. Take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Emotionally Wealthy.
Hey therapists, welcome back. Today I have Karen Conlon. I'm so excited to have you on. It's great to reconnect. We just reconnected for about 30 minutes before this. So that was awesome. So just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your burnout story.
Thanks, Jen. Super stoked to be here. And as you mentioned, I'm Karen Conlon, and I'm a therapist who specializes with working with anxiety and trauma. My burnout has a few stages that I've gone through. I just realized it really that I realized the need to do something about it that was more long term after you and I worked together. I've been listening to your podcast, and it's like, gosh, I really, everything you were saying like resonated with me so much. And there was one particular guest that you had that I was like, oh my gosh, this woman's like telling my story and like so many things that you were saying. And then I reached out to you. We worked together, and that was kind of like, it didn't take much, right? Like we would meet and you'd be like, okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks and whatever. And then I'd see you in 2 weeks. You're like, so how's that? I was like, I did it. Oh, okay. Like there was like, I needed, like you were giving me the permission that I needed to, get things done. But in terms of burnout, one of the things that I realized was that I've gone through probably 4 stages of burnout. The first one that started actually in grad school with my very first internship, but I didn't know what that was about. I had no idea. Now looking back, of course, wow. Thank goodness for this one professor who noticed changes in my behavior. Like I wasn't participating in the classroom and stuff like that. She took me aside. She's like, hey, what's going on with you? And talked to me a little bit about, setting boundaries and explaining to me like, hey, our jobs are not to fix people's lives, which was like a mind blowing thing for me. I was like, what do you mean? Then why are we doing this? And she's like, well, no, think about it, right? How do you fix someone's lives if someone's life, if you are not really in control of anything that they do, think, say, right? I mean, even when they're in session with you, you don't even know if people are telling you the full truth of what's happening, right? Or the full scope. So how do you talk? So she really gave me this beautiful, and she's she was a trauma therapist, and she recognized the vicarious trauma that I was going through and stuff there. And she just really set me up for what I felt was a wonderful way of practicing. And it's probably helped me not get so far into burnout actually throughout the years, because she really set me up with that message, right? Of like, it's not your job to fix people. You can coach, you can teach, you can help reflect, you can help observe, you can provide observation, reflections, all these things. But you must liberate yourself from the thought that it's your job to fix people's lives, because you can't and you shouldn't. And you need to get away from that so that you can be a more effective therapist and clinician, or whatever it is that you decide to do if you're working with people.
Yeah. Why do you think even though no one said it, we feel like we need to fix our clients, even though we'd never out loud say, I need to fix my client? I think we feel that.
Yeah. I thought about that question for myself for many years. I think we all know this, right? Like, it's kind of like the joke, in the space that a lot of us go into this work because we're still kind of working through our own stuff. And sometimes, or maybe you've worked through your own stuff and then you want to help other people, right, with that stuff. And so, I think I recognize that in myself many, many times, as much as I had, pretty decent boundaries, I think, for myself and with people. Like, I was never the person that I could hear really, and I have heard really horrific things, but I didn't take it home. I was able to disconnect from that. But there is a feeling with some people, especially, I think those most vulnerable ones, the ones that, man, you hear their stories and you're like, wow, you never really even had a chance, did you?
Yeah.
Right. And you really, when you're working with them, and it doesn't matter what they do on the outside. I'm talking about people who can be like, who are in very high level positions that you would, and public figures and people who you never think, right? But when you're working in this space, you see the wounded child. You get the privilege, and I say that very humbly, the privilege that they're letting you into their lives in a way where many people, most people in their lives, don't get to see them. And so you really are working with that wounded child. And so you see that, and you experience that, and you're helping them through that. And so it's, you really have to check yourself, right, with transference and countertransference that happens in this space.
Yeah.
And that tendency then of wanting to, like, oh, I really want to protect you somehow.
Yeah. And that's human, that we want to do that we want to not see suffering in our clients, and we want to try to protect them from that, yet we can't. And I think that's the paradox. Is that we feel all these things, we have real feelings towards our clients, we really care for them, yet we're not in their lives.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, we are not in their lives, but we are. That's the thing, right? Like, we are such an instrumental part. I mean, how many times haven't I heard, right? Like, oh my gosh, Karen, this was happening and I heard you in my head say to myself, like, wait, how do I really feel in this moment? Right. So when you hear clients say things like that to you, like, gosh, and you were in my head in this moment where I really needed, to dig into my resources, and you are literally one of their resources, right? You realize, that you're not just a person that they enjoy coming to, or sometimes they don't enjoy, but they need to, right? Or they want to because they, right? But
I know I've had a lot of clients that say, like, I don't like coming here. You're all right, but I don't like coming here.
Yeah. I don't really want to talk about it. Do we have to talk about it? Yeah. But then, there that comes with this huge sense of, sort of, at least for me, a realization, like, oh wow, like, what I say really matters. What I say, even something that's like maybe in passing, Wow, I really have to think about what I'm saying here, because even something that I'm saying in passing is something that could really stick.
Yeah. So,
So,
yeah, you're right. We are not in their lives like part of their
yeah,
relational circle. However, we become part of them. I think
that
of
psyche, yeah, emotional
their
psyche.
psyche. And I think about even some research on memories, how like memories of our loved ones, even though, we're living as their therapists, but
Yeah.
we remember memories of a person. So even after they've passed, they still have parts of their loved one with them. So I think of
Mm-hmm.
often that of what pieces of us are they carrying with them, which is kind of a beautiful thing to think about, that we are kind of with them
Yeah.
in many, many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Um, and so just kind of going back to like the burnout stages, I started out with that in grad school. Luckily, I had this professor that recognized it right away and talked me through it. My next job was at an adolescent health center where I was seeing between 90 to 120 teens per month, and very high risk, a lot of high risk behaviors, a lot of, issues with, parenting, and parents, because a lot of times they just were trying to do the best they can, working, or, struggling with, drug use or whatever it was that was going on. And so, child protective services oftentimes, so there was that experience of dealing with child protective services and negotiating that discussion with the kids beforehand so that they wouldn't lose trust in me, and like, look, I have to do this, and but I'm not going to leave you out of it, right? Like, let's do this together. And then dealing with parents who are very, very upset and angry. um and then after that, I worked at a Mount Sinai hospital, working with chronic illness. um, that was such a rewarding job and work. But that also had its challenges as well, as the job changed and there was definite burnout there.
Yeah.
And here we are in private practice, years later, and beautiful, many beautiful years um, in private practice, but also still experiencing at some certain point burnout, especially post pandemic. I describe it as, like post pandemic. What did I say the other day? I forget what I called it, but it's just like a post pandemic reaction, the delayed reaction. That's what I called it. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
having a post pandemic delayed reaction because I spent so much of the pandemic putting out fires, hiring. I had a group practice at the time, and just wanting to try to make sure to get my clinicians trained and everybody supervised, and our clients cared for, and I was not really paying attention to what was happening with me.
Yeah. I think I keep talking more and more on the podcast of people's reactions post pandemic.
Yeah.
And, I think early on, we were just, in that kind of initial crisis phase. We're just like, okay, I just got to keep going, keep going, keep going. And of course, I think many therapists, I think nearly all of them that I've talked to,
Mm-hmm.
hit some kind of burnout wall. Most of my
Mm-hmm.
friends around me who are clinicians hit that in some way or shape or form.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't
Absolutely.
think we really talk about like, okay, yeah, I hit that, but we don't talk about really how did you get through it, or if you're still in it, like what are you doing? Like
Mm-hmm.
how are you maintaining that high level of arousal and cortisol that's running through your body?
Yeah.
And I think my last guest that's actually dropped today, but our recording will be on later, talked about just feeling like a sense of loss of sense of self, because that
Mm-hmm.
constant giving, so kind of human giver syndrome, like I give, and
Yeah.
then what is left for me? Like, who am I now? Because all I've been doing is giving.
Yes, that lands. That
Yeah.
lands. Wow. Yeah. That does land. Um, I think that, I mean, obviously I'm not the first and not going to be the last, woman to say this, right? I think that generally speaking, we as women are conditioned to give of ourselves and think of others, and that if we think about ourselves or put ourselves first, there's something bad about you, or or you have to make up for it in other ways. Um, I have certainly not been an exception to that value system that was given to me. And so I find that a lot of the things that I have done and the way that I do interact and do things, I'm not a people pleaser necessarily. I wouldn't say that I'm that, but I definitely like to see people doing well and, I don't know, being a better version of themselves and seeing them happy to, have done that. And so in one way or another, I've always been trying to help people do that.
Yeah.
But it's resulted in me constantly, of sometimes being constantly in that space and not really a lot of stopping happening. It, the burnout, it's interesting. It makes me wonder if I've burned out, even before being in therapy, right? Like, have I had other spaces and other times when I burnt out, and just didn't realize it. I know that for me, dealing with burnout has been, the way that I've dealt with burnout has been by starting something new, right? Either I look for a new job or a new thing to do, or I have a new project that's exciting. And my gosh, now I have to learn, I have to research. I love my research. And that seeking out that stimulation, um, and just being able to look elsewhere. That's not where I have to be, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And so part of my story
Mm.
was, I have to like find the escape hatch from whatever the burnout thing that I needed to leave. Okay. So if
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
foster care, I can't work with kids anymore. So let's just start a doctoral program. Doctoral program was like, oh my gosh, that had an end date. So I feel like that was all right. It was still hard.
Yeah.
But then,
Yeah.
passing the buck, agency and then private practice, I think that it just kind of keeps catching up with us. And then, as we get older, especially for, therapists who are around that midlife time, getting your license. And then a lot of us who are female identifying, we're also birthing people or having children. And so
Yeah.
add more complexity to giving and to
Yeah.
the demands on us. And then I think at the end of the day, we kind of look at our lives and we're like, yes, this giving that I'm doing as a therapist is important, but where really do I need to put my first level of giving? And that would, for me, be the people that are in my immediate circle, like in my real life, like
Yeah.
my children, my spouse, my friends. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the burnout, what it does is it has us become more untethered to our natural supports because we're constantly
Yeah.
giving that we then look when we're in burnout, we're like, where are the people? Where are my lasagnas? Why are people like helping me out?
Yeah. So, it's interesting, right? Because it's an interesting thing you're bringing up here, because in the therapy space, right? I mean, if you think about it, it is a one-way relationship
Yeah.
in many ways,
And it should
right?
be
As it
some
should
ways.
be. Right? No, I mean right. I mean, yes, it's a two-way relationship, but in terms of uh what we think about traditionally, or what a conventional relationship is, right, which is a two-way street, whether it's a friendship or, right, an intimate relationship, it's a two-way street. You give and you get, you give and you get. But with with your therapy clients, it is, and like you said, it should be, a one-way, really, right? Now, I am not a believer of that whole old I find it to be old school that, you just sit there like a blank face and like, you don't disclose, right? Like I've always been a person that feels like, no, my clients need to understand that I'm a person, right? Like I have a kid, right? Like all my clients always know that I have a child, that I have a family. They know that sometimes like, oh, I drive to whatever, to the game, right? I'm doing carpooling, right? Like the little chit chat that happens.
Yeah.
To let people know, because they ask you like, how was your weekend, what did you do, right? So I'm not going to be like, well, how was your weekend, no, like, oh yeah.
That would be
Right.
inappropriate for me to share about my weekend. I don't
Yes.
think I can do it.
Why is that important, like, yeah, I mean,
What
come
does that
on,
mean for you?
right. Yeah, we're human beings, right? And so for me, that's always been a very important part of my practice, is to let people know that I am also a human being, because it's important for them to know that I'm fallible, because I do make mistakes, and I will make mistakes also in session, right? And so it's a wonderful way of also understanding that there's also repair, and that we can work through this, right? Because this is a real relationship in many ways, but
Yeah.
but in the ethical ways, it's a very, very much a one-way relationship, because you're not there to like tell your clients about like what you're doing, like you're your friends, and like what your mom said, or what this one said. And no,
Yeah.
these sessions are not about you. And so if that is all you're doing, and you're not surrounding yourself with friends and family members and other people, um who, by the way, are not treating you as a therapist, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, right? Setting those boundaries. But then this can become a very, very isolating profession, and that it is a surefire way towards not just burnout, but like really possibly crossing those boundaries with your clients, if that's all you have, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And we've heard those stories, right? And
yeah.
part of me, maybe we'll take a little sidebar on Facebook groups and Reddit threads and things like that, of situations where they've heard of therapists, like we'll hear clients tell us like, this therapist asked me to, pick up their laundry. Or I had a client tell me that, and
What?
they did not want me to report them to I wanted to report that therapist, but the
Yeah.
client really strongly felt that they did not want, and it's a different situation. Actually, it's not the laundry, but I'm making that up just to
Yeah, sure.
protect any clinical information. But let's say it was an errand, and they became part of their clinician's life. And I was like, oh, well, actually, we're not allowed to do that. And that would be something that's reportable for that particular therapist. And they felt strongly they did not want that therapist reported. They did not want it brought up. And so we processed that, went through that whole thing, and I just had to go over ethical code. So we hear about these situations. I heard about it firsthand from a client of mine at one point when I was seeing clients. And I think the initial reaction from most therapists is to bash that therapist. That therapist is unethical. They're so inappropriate. How could they ever do that? And I think that is a reaction we have. And yes, they shouldn't have done that. But we have to think about like, what got them there?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
what made them think that was okay?
Yeah. Where
What support?
there's context, right? I mean, without context, words are just words. So that's important. There's context, but I mean, yeah, that's.
But talk to me. You in the pre-interview, we talked a little bit about your experience in these Reddit threads and Facebook groups when you were dealing with stuff. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So it's been interesting. I did a lot of work around when I was going into private practice, around money mindset. I always engage as much as possible in supervision and consultation. I also I'm a big believer in, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are people who have done it very well before me. And so, in that way, I've always liked to invest in myself by investing in other people who have done it before me, and, get coached, get trained, get, business consulting. And so, because of that, I was able to learn a lot of really great strategies to get my business up and running very quickly, and what I call successfully. And um, what I started to find as I started doing more like Facebook groups and then like Reddit and, all these areas that, you're basically looking for support and, just kind of to uh, have other people that get you,
Yeah.
hoping. What I started to realize was that there's actually such a huge divide and a lot of righteousness around, what you charge, what you should charge, what you don't charge. Um, Sometimes I think about it, gosh, like if I go to my doctor, my specialist, and I say to him, you've got some gall for charging what you charge to, I don't know, for my colonoscopy, how dare you, or whatever, right? Like, or some service that's not covered.
Yeah.
I would never think of saying that, but yet in this profession, not only um do sometimes clients say to us, but like what I found is in a lot of these threads, people say it to therapists, say it to each other. And there, there's a I think there's a group of people who are very much about like, no, like, look, you're not meant to service everyone, and I'm of that group because I'm not going to be good with everyone.
Yeah.
I need to know myself and know what I like and what I'm good at. That's how I'm going to service people. But I also need to be able to make a living and pay for my kids' school. And we need to have two cars where we live. And, I want to go on a vacation once a year. Like I have the right to want to do those things.
Yeah.
And that's going to require me charging X amount so that I can make a living. And by the way, not only was it graduate school, there's like tons of continuing education courses that, I spent thousands of dollars on that my clients also received the benefit of. Right.
Right.
But I think, there's also a group of folks that have a mindset around like, well, too bad, so sad. Like you should not be having any of those things or if you have to have them by charging people what you feel you're worth,
Yeah.
which how dare you. So I find that, if you haven't done the work around money mindset as a therapist, and become very strong and clear about what your values are. And by the way, I don't think that there's good or bad in any of those. What I find incredibly hurtful and inappropriate is for people to bash either way, by the way, because you also have those therapists that are saying to people like, you're bringing down the profession by charging so little. And, I've seen that too. And that is not okay.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, right? But you hear it more the other way. And I think that also contributes to burnout because then there's this pressure around like, oh, well, charge less and then see more people. I want you to think about your clients, right? If you think about this, right? If you're seeing 30 to 40 clients per week and you're meeting with each of them 45 to, let's say, 50 minutes on average, right? Do you really want to be that middle or last person on that therapist's roster for the day? How much of that therapist do you think you're getting? How much quality
Mm-hmm.
do you think you're getting? I mean, think about that. So, my thought is for me, I want to give as much quality as possible. I have a friend who very successfully sees on average 30 clients per week, and she loves it. And she has divided up her days in ways that she goes and she does her like workouts in between. Like I don't know, she has figured it out.
Tell her to be coming on the podcast.
I know, and it's like amazing.
People
and she loves it.
Is anyone doing it right? I'm like, yes, there are many therapists who I'm sure are thriving and like they figured it out. And so I'm wanting to have a couple of them on the podcast as well.
Yeah, I mean, she loves it, but she said, she tells me, I was like, how do you do it? She's like, well, 45 minutes. I don't go over the 45 minutes. She's like, very much like,
I think they're
this is
bounded
it.
as hell. Yeah, they're just like, time's up. Bye.
And, she's like, and I've got, if I have to go do my Zumba in between, my morning sessions, my afternoon sessions, that's what she does. Um, Look, nothing is perfect, right? Because when you have children, then, like, yeah, if you're going to see that many people, so something's got to give, right? So, something's got to give. And you have children, maybe they have to be a little bit more self-sufficient in certain ways because, again, you can't do it all super successfully, right?
Yeah.
Um,
You know what's interesting that I read this anxious generation book. I don't know if you saw it yet, but they talked about how much extra time that our generation is actually mothering due to not having family support. Also with, kids need to be monitored, like we need to keep them safe. Whereas like I walked home in first grade.
oh my God. I mean, I was
So
just
we're
talking
actually
to
spending
my
more time
husband.
parenting.
Yeah, I was just talking to my husband about like, oh my gosh, I remember my favorite thing in the world was going in the back of a station wagon with like no seatbelts because every time like if you stop short, you'd like tumble around like dice, and like in the back. There was none of that, But yeah, you're right. There's finding this there's finding a balance, right? Trying to find that balance and it's really hard. I mean, I'm a parent to a teen also and I've worked with many teens. Now I'm a parent of a teen. I wrote a book on it, and I am still, at the end of the day, just a mom, right? Trying to figure out, oh my gosh, this is actually happening now. How do I talk to her about this? Even though, like, I've talked to, hundreds of teens about whatever that is, right? But
Yeah.
now it's my kid,
It's
right?
different.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It is different.
So I wanted to get to talking a little bit more if we can pivot back to kind of private practice stuff. So we talked a little bit on the pre-interview about how these longer term relationships can contribute to maybe it was your fourth phase of burnout or your fifth phase of burnout, and that's, at the end of your private practice is when we work together. But maybe share a little bit about just the nature of like longer term therapy relationships and why that contributes to burnout, maybe what we need, all the things on that topic.
So I've had the pleasure of having had very long-term clients. I know that for some people saying, oh, you've worked somebody for 6 years, 8 years, that's not right or whatever. But, the thing is that I agree with that if there is no progress. I'm not a rent-a-friend type of, like I just, is that bad?
Rent a friend just hit me really funny for some reason.
I just, I don't, I don't do it. And I mean, I think, I'm not right. Like I very much like to see, that we're working and it doesn't mean that we have to work every single, right. But, part of the reward, at least that I get from this work, or have gotten in the past was, seeing the changes, the subtle changes, seeing that retraining of their brains, right? I'm very, very neuroscience, oriented. And so a lot of my work was very much based on changes that happen in the brain and neuroplasticity. And I would teach my clients about that. I really wanted them to be empowered. So those clients that I worked with for so many years, I worked with them because we started out one place and then it was like, anybody who knows me knows the saying, new level, new devil, like you've heard me say it. And it's because, wow, now like, you've achieved mastery in this space, right? Or in this place that we've been working on now. And now we're coming up with new things, right? And it's not because we're coming up with new things for the heck of it. It's because, wow, like now you've reached this level of mastery and this whole new world has opened up for you. whether it's in relationships or a relationship or career or resilience. And so now those things that were working for you at this other level, maybe not working so much in this new one.
Yeah.
And, you, in many instances, you, again, like I was telling you before, you're working a lot when you're working with trauma and anxiety, right? You're working a lot with that child, with that wounded child, that, that comes up a lot. So in a very weird way, it's like watching people grow up and into themselves. Like it's this, I mean, I guess I get goosebumps as I think about it and talk about it now because I'm thinking I'm having this like number of people that throughout the years, I've experienced that with watching them, um, let go of those coping mechanisms, those defense mechanisms that they had to take on as children and let go of them, right? And feel confident and safe that even if they make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. Like that's okay.
Yeah.
And so you care, right? Like you're a human being. You care about these folks. I think for me, I can't speak for anybody else, but sometimes you become very invested in their lives and what's going on and, how they're coping. Um, and this is where I think for me, it's having worked with the longer term clients, ironically, in private practice, uh, that has contributed more to this latest burnout than not, because number one, like I said before, wasn't really paying attention to what was going on for me. I had a bunch of health issues that none of my clients really knew about. All related to not taking care of myself. But I was having some health issues that were, becoming serious. And none of them had any clue, of course. And so, I found myself having, less, I think, I found myself having a harder time, Jen, just putting into perspective those internal boundaries around like, okay, so that's their decision. Let me help them kind of think
Yeah.
through that. And I found myself more kind of like thinking to myself, like, no, why are you doing that? No, no, no. Like, and having those types of thoughts
I
versus,
remember, when we were, and this also was true for me.
yeah.
And is kind of part of the burnout. It's part of the classic definition is like that resentment and kind of the sometimes anger or really kind of like depleting emotions that come out. And I think of like that countertransference with the client of feeling like at the end of yourself and you're asking, X, Y, and Z to move your session or to, accommodate this and don't see my humanity.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can speak to that, like when you're in these relationships with folks that struggle in relationship with folks.
I mean, it's really, really hard because you're struggling yourself. And oftentimes for the first time with these relationships. I mean, this last phase for me, this was the first time that I can tell you that I really struggled with those relationships because I didn't realize it then, but I was experiencing compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
And I wasn't recognizing what was happening. I didn't realize it. But I always try to be self-aware and to say to myself, hey, why did you think that? What happened to you? What was going on for you in session? Why were you feeling like that? I would always ask myself, like, why were you feeling agitated? Or why were you getting irritated? Like, what's going on with you, Karen? I would always ask myself.
Yeah.
I didn't always have the answer.
I remember you saying like one thing, like, I'm just like, I'm starting to care less. Like I can feel that in myself which is hallmark compassion fatigue, right? That we our carometer
Yeah. Yeah.
is not working as well.
Yeah. And then that felt really awful. I had so much guilt
Right.
around that because, like, when you get to the point where you say that out loud, first you say to yourself, could this be happening? Then when you get to a point, like when you and I were working together, that I say that out loud, it was like, wow, and so then you go, at least for me, started going down that rabbit hole. Like, well, what does that mean about me? Like, am I actually a bad person? What's happening
Oh,
here?
yeah.
Like, am I, but it was at that point also where I said to myself, I don't want to practice like this. This is not who I am. And this is not who
Yeah.
I want to be as a practitioner. I've always, prided myself in being as, showing up as best as I could. And I don't want to stop doing that now. And I think I really need to, um, something was different about this burnout though, Jen. Something was very different.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. Like in all the burnout that I've ever had in the past, I never felt the compassion fatigue. This time was different. And it scared me because I was like, I don't want to stop caring. Like that's not who I am. And, maybe this is a big, um, red flag that I need to pause this or put a stop to it because, I always want to care.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
want to not
it
care.
feels like, we're losing parts of ourselves. Like I always identify as someone
Yeah.
who is caring, who, sees the good in people. And I think all the literature kind of supports that if we hear a bunch of traumatic material, of course, it changes our worldview. It changes the way we
Yeah.
see the world. And so a break can help to see more goodness again. And I
Yes.
think it's that permission that you likely need a break for that stuff to come back in because you're in that trauma bath still. And so,
Yeah.
of course, you're not like, but I used to see the sunshine. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you did. But it's hard. It's hard when you're still in it to feel like I can get to that place where I can just turn the page. It makes so much sense. But again, while you're in it, it's hard to see it. And it's hard to, I think, have that perspective change that is
Yeah.
necessary.
Yeah. And also the other thing too, with that, with long-term clients, I think it's, at least for me, it's important to talk about termination. That
Yeah.
was like a really big thing. I really struggled with terminating, with clients that I felt like, listen, I feel like you're good. Or I feel like, I think my work is done here. If you want to continue, I feel like maybe somebody with a different scope or a different approach, um, and when I would, let's say, try to bring that up, and listen, I probably was not as effective at it either because I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. So I probably skirted around it the way, much more than I should have. And then the response was typically like, oh no, yeah, no, this is over. This is great, and I would say, okay, well, what's changed? Like, what's different? What would you say, you know, and what do you think we still need to work on? So there was always something new in it. And so I just felt like, okay, well, if you're feeling like there's something new, even though in my heart of hearts, I was like, I think we're okay though. I think our work is done. I don't think your work is necessarily done, but maybe like,
Yeah.
you
Like
know,
my part of your journey is done.
yes, yes,
And so I talk so much about, I had a whole episode on unilateral termination and how when it's come from the perspective of the therapist initiating that termination, we really don't have great examples or training or supervision. So I feel like I'm definitely talking about that all the time.
ah,
And I just
yeah,
think we need so much support that it is totally okay if you, number one, no longer feel effective as the therapist in that relationship. Number two, the client is no longer making progress. And number three, we forget about directly from ethical code if they would be further harmed by the work. And we don't think through those three ethical imperatives when we're considering termination, because again, you can't see the label if you're in the jar. And so I think it does take really intentional consultation and supervision. So with that, we have to start wrapping up, which is so sad because I could talk to you forever. But
Oh, thank
I
you.
know we wanted to get to two things. So my last question, which is Joy, before that, you told me you wanted to offer, like, if I were to do it all again, I would do this. So can you share that?
Yeah. So if I were to do it all again, number one is I would not put any pauses on having supervision or clinical consultation, because there have been times where I've been like, oh, you know what, I'm pretty good. Let me, I'm fine. And it's not that it hasn't been, but in hindsight, I always do wonder. I was like, I wonder if maybe if I continued with having clinical consultation or supervision, if maybe I would have been able to work through some of those things. We're humans, and a lot of times without realizing, we are reenacting things with clients. So this is not a deficit in you. This is you recognizing that, you're as human as the person that you're working with. And then the other thing too is about termination. In graduate school, they talk to us and they always say, right, termination starts with the first session. Sure. But they don't really tell you how to do that and how to approach that. So, if I could do it all again, and if I were training somebody new, one of the things that I would really recommend and that I would do myself is have those first session, first or second session, and how to talk about termination and say, look, we have work to do, but we need to, I think, look at what the ending will look like for you, and how do we know when we've reached it? And sure, everybody talks about, yeah, well, that's where you have like a treatment plan for and this and that. But I'm talking about really being very intentional about, okay, well, having it with you, checking in every other session. Let's look at our treatment plan. How are we doing? Because it tends to veer off, and this is how sometimes you go into these places where you're just like, well, I feel like we should terminate, but we haven't, and we're not, and then you feel like you have no good reason. So, if you could have some things that are a little bit more concrete to say, so how are we doing? Do you feel like we've accomplished this? That's one thing that I would do, and I would encourage newer clinicians to kind of get around the mindset, because it also gives you something to hold on to if you feel like, you know what, I'm not being effective anymore, or I feel like this person really could do with EMDR or a different approach that I can offer. And you're not hurting their feelings. We're talking about like, look, this is what we talked about, and why they're reaching them or we're not, or we have reached them, and how are we doing? Is it time to take a pause on it?
Yeah, I've heard of some therapists even saying, like, I work with clients for 6 months or to a year, and that's my max that I work with a client. So I think that's another way to kind of help protect yourself from like getting into these stagnant places where we're not doing our best work. Again, that bumps up against your theoretical orientation, like for analysts, which I don't know anybody who practices as an analyst really.
Yeah.
But I think part of that being an analyst is that you have your own analyst. So I think they're like kind of doing that stuff all the time if they're in that model. So I digress. Those are great.
No, but I agree. Yeah, no, that I agree. I actually like that model about, kind of having to say, let's give ourselves, 6 months and see how this goes. And then after that, another 6 months. And then that's, if we haven't reached our goal after that, so like, you have the right to do that and set your practice policies.
Yeah. I mean, setting that stuff up for yourself at the outset and knowing that if I don't do that, then I might have difficulty. And I would add on another one is that please do consult calls and figure out who you can and cannot work with, because we get in situations a lot of times clinically with clients with whom we really struggle with. And we likely should not see them because we are not effective with that particular clinical issue, or it bumps up against our kind of transference, or their personality just is hard for our personality to kind of mesh with. So consider that really having that consult call be a interview also for you as the therapist to see if you can be effective in that relationship.
Yeah.
Don't skip that process.
100%. It is so important to have somebody else give you a bird's eye view of the work you're doing. Just so important. Mm-hmm.
And then Karen, how are you finding joy today?
Oh man. So I'm finding joy these days. Going to my kids' games, actually taking the time to, I went to her games, of course, before and things like that, but just being very present. Like, I'm not thinking about like, oh my gosh, I'm here, but now, I have to think about that's the schedule and tomorrow. Just being very present, driving her here and there. Believe it or not, this one time I'm finding joy in finding my health. I'm having a lot of like doctor's appointments and getting myself all good. And I feel great. I feel so happy about that. So I'm actually really finding so much joy in getting my health back, if I'm going to be completely honest.
That's great.
Yeah. So that's the best answer I could give you on that one.
I love it.
Real.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, I so enjoyed working with you when we worked together. You're just so funny and vibrant. And I just feel like there's going to be more collaborations with us on here. So where can the good people reach out to you if they want to talk more with you? And maybe just a little bit about your book, just so they know like kind of about that.
Oh, sure. So I wrote a book. It's targeting 13 to 17-year-olds. It's but I wrote it with parents and teachers and adults in mind. So if you are a parent or a teacher or someone who works with teenagers, you can read it. I read it with you all in mind too, but it's called The Teenager's Guide to Adulting Skills and Life Hacks. You can find it on Amazon. It's on Audible as well. If you're a big audio fan, I'm a big audiobook fan. Kindle, all that good stuff. And I've actually been doing coaching instead of therapy for the last few months. So if you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at Karen@expressivetalks.com, or you can go on my website, expressivetalks.com.
And I'll put those links in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks for having me. So fun to see you. Love seeing you.
Of course. Always. Yes. We'll talk soon.
All right, my dear. I'll talk to you soon.
Oh, hey, quick reminder for you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always consult a qualified professional with any questions you might have.
Thanks to our friends at BuzzSpear for helping with post-production and distribution.